Now, let's look at the Office of the Special Prosecutor before we come into some of the key things they have said they would be working on since its inception, with Martin Amidou down now to Kisi Jabing. How effective is the Office of the Special Prosecutor?
Well, I'll say from my perspective, it has been extremely effective. I say so because there's a context within which Act 959 was developed. And that context was the fact that, by and large, civil society and beyond recognized that the Attorney General and Minister Justice of the state was absolutely unlikely to prosecute any member of government so appointed. And we had tried several times to try and get traction on that. We concluded that you needed somebody arm's length from the government of the day to be willing to begin to take up issues with government officers and others as well beyond the public domain, especially with high-level issues of corruption and impunity. And to that extent, we've seen that shift. That's the primary thing. Let's begin to make sure that such persons are being hauled before the law. I also say so within the context that don't forget that for the first 4 years, that office was literally manned by less than 15 people, probably just about 10. It wasn't until the last quarter of 2023 that they were given permission to now engage staff. So to all extents and purposes, that office became properly equipped in terms of capacity, labor capacity, in 2024. So if you wanted to do a real assessment, it's from 2024, they've had, let's say, 1 year of being equipped with the kind of manpower to do the work required. And yet in that space of time, they've taken quite a number of cases. In our space for good governance, we say that prevention is better than prosecution, because prevention makes sure that you don't then spend or throw good money after bad money, like they say, and go chasing things which might not be able to retrieve in the long run. So I think that has served as a deterrent. I think it has served as a mechanism to pick up big ticket issues of corruption. It has served as a way of ensuring that persons in government have been hauled, have been investigated, and you see that the posture of governments have been uncomfortable. It's been evident to all of us that persons in government have been uncomfortable with the existence of an OSP because they know they'll come after them and they do not fear taking up these issues. So for me, it's been very effective given the context within which we decided to set it up.
What's your reading into this fresh move by the OSP to investigate the issues regarding the National Cathedral and some payments made by the then Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta? Looking at the timing, is it right?
I think that the OSP, as you know, is an independent institution, allowed to use its discretion to decide what issues to take up at what point. I see that the issue of the National Cathedral is topical. It is relevant. Indeed, one of the expectations of the OSP was not to have a situation where issues come up and nobody seems to be responding. And so it is relevant if the OSP has decided to take up the issue on the back of the work done by Trudge, which has been very explicit in talking about contracts that ought not to have been issued and what have you. And mind you, I think it's a referral. So if there's been a referral, the documentation and the paper trail suggests that it's been put before them and they ought to act on it. And so I think it's not an issue of an unjustified timing. I think the logic of the timing makes sense within the context and within the referral.
But some critics argue that really the Office of the Special Prosecutor, some of these investigations may lead nowhere, given its track record of failing to secure a single successful corruption prosecution since its inception. You agree?
No, I don't agree.
Why?
I think that it's just like also looking at the developmental progress of any nation. If you do an assessment of the European democracies, it took them about 200 years to get to the point where people will be impressed, so to speak, with what they've achieved. Take us as a nation. how far have we come? 60-something plus years. Whatever you start, it takes time to get everything in place. In my view, where we are now, we have clearly identified that some of our gaps are with the current legislative framework. There's a need to strengthen it. There are laws that we don't have in place. We don't have a reverse burden of proof. We don't have an unexplained wealth legal framework. That's important. We don't have the Code of Public Officers Conduct passed, something that would then make it distinctly clear that these are offenses and these are the sanctions to be applied if you went before a court. So the OSP may be struggling in court because the legal framework and environment has not been properly defined to assist it. I also think that we need specialized courts that will fast-track issues of good governance and corruption. That way, those courts would have people trained to understand the terrain, people willing to understand what it needs to be done to set these precedents that make it serve as a deterrent for other persons so minded to attempt to get into corruption. So I think that we should not look at the OSP as the criminal, as the offender here. You need to understand the exigencies and the challenges that they are also confronted with from a technical perspective. So we have to do work on our legal framework. In other jurisdictions, these things are clear. Look at the Cecilia Dapar case. Whilst the OSP law doesn't allow them to look into issues of unexplained wealth, etc., the Yoko law had that clause clearly spelled out, but Yoko refused to follow up. So that then, after OSP has done all the work, their mandate doesn't allow them to take the next step because the law doesn't ascribe that to them. But the Yoko law had it clearly spelled out, and yet they refrain from doing it. So we need to appreciate the legal context and the challenges being confronted. Let's do the work required to make it easier for them to get those rulings done. And by the way, issues of convictions are just one of the many indicators that ought to be used in terms of assessing the work of the OSP.
Okay, in 1 minute before I let you go, what must change this time in his approach? Because he has served notice that when it comes to the banking sector crisis, he will also be looking into that. The post-election allegations of vote buying, he would be looking into that. So he's keeping his tabs on a number of issues. But what approach should be changed this time?
I think that with a new government in place, we need to strongly pursue the issue of work on the legal frameworks. We need specialized courts and legal frameworks that are tighter, such that if they have to take any cases to court, there's clarity on what the crime is, the offenses, and the sanctions, and the persons involved in that court process are persons who've been trained to assist them. Then we will get better results as the conviction part of it. But I think in the other areas, they're doing quite a bit of good work in terms of investigation, in terms of administrative feedback to improving guidelines and processes that have leakages. I think that a lot of work is being done there. And they need to showcase that much better than they have done in the past, so people understand that other work which is really, really critical to good governance is also being achieved by the OSP.
Thank you, Edem Senanu.